The ink was still wet on the divorce papers when Brandon laughed, tossing a black Amex card onto the mahogany table. "Take it, Audrey. It's enough to rent a studio apartment in Queens for a month. Consider it severance pay for a wasted 2-year marriage." His mistress Jessica giggled from the corner, already mentally redecorating his penthouse. They thought Audrey was a broke orphan with nowhere to go. They thought she was trembling with fear. But they didn't see the man in the charcoal suit sitting silently in the back of the boardroom. They didn't know that the man was Harrison Caldwell, the owner of the very skyscraper they were sitting in, and Audrey's father. And they certainly didn't know that signing those papers just cost Brandon his entire future. The conference room at Halloway & Associates smelled of expensive leather stale coffee and the impending destruction of a marriage. It was located on the 45th floor of a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, offering a panoramic view of a gray, rainy New York City. Audrey sat on one side of the long, polished mahogany table. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple beige cardigan that had seen better days and no jewelry, not even the wedding band she had taken off 3 days ago. Opposite her sat Brandon. He looked every inch the rising tech mogul he claimed to be. His suit was a custom navy blue cut from Italian wool. His watch was a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars, and his smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Let's make this simple, Audrey," Brandon said, sliding the thick stack of documents toward her. The paper made a dry, rasping sound against the wood. "I'm tired. You're tired. We both know this marriage was a miscalculation." "A miscalculation," Audrey repeated softly. Her voice was steady, though her eyes were fixed on the word dissolution, printed in bold at the top of the page. "Don't play the victim." Brandon sighed, leaning back in his ergonomic chair. "Look, when we met, you were waiting tables at Le Cuckoo. I thought I was rescuing you. I thought you'd be grateful to be the wife of the CEO of Nexus Stream. But let's be honest, you were never cut out for this world. You don't know how to dress for galas. You don't know how to talk to investors. You're just—" He waved his hand vaguely, searching for a polite word, and failing to find one. "Boring," a voice chimed in from the corner of the room. Audrey didn't flinch. She knew Jessica was there. Jessica Brandon's executive assistant was currently perched on the windowsill, scrolling through her phone. She was 22, blonde, and wearing a dress that was entirely inappropriate for a legal proceeding. "She's just boring, Brandon," Jessica said, not looking up from her screen. "And she cooks weird food. Who makes pot roast for a VP of marketing? It's embarrassing." Brandon chuckled. "Right. The point is, Audrey, my company is about to go public. The IPO is next month. My lawyers and my PR team suggest that a clean break is better now than later. Single looks better than married to a nobody when I'm ringing the opening bell at the NYSE. Audrey looked up at him. "So that's it. 2 years of marriage, and I'm a liability to your stock price. It's business, Audrey. Don't make it emotional." Brandon tapped the papers. "Here's the deal. The prenup says you get nothing because you came in with nothing. But because I'm a generous guy—" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black credit card. He tossed it onto the table. It spun and landed near her hand. "There's $10,000 on that. Enough to get a deposit on a place in, I don't know, New Jersey, Queens, somewhere cheap. And I'll let you keep the Honda." The lawyer sitting next to Brandon, a sweating man named Mr. Gables, cleared his throat. "Mr. Cross, technically the Honda is leased under the company now." "Let her keep the damn Honda, Gables," Brandon snapped. "I'm feeling charitable." He looked back at Audrey with a smirk. "See, I'm a good guy. Now sign the papers. I have a lunch reservation at Per Se at 1. Audrey looked at the papers. Then she looked at the credit card. $10,000. 2 years ago, she had met Brandon when he was just starting Nexus Stream. He was stressed, barely making payroll and eating takeout at the diner she worked at for fun to clear her head from her studies. He hadn't rescued her. She had listened to his pitches. She had organized his chaotic schedule before he could afford Jessica. She had even used her own savings money, she claimed was an inheritance from a grandmother, to cover the rent on their first office space when his investors pulled out. He had forgotten all of that. "You really think I'm after your money, Brandon?" Audrey asked quietly. "Everyone wants money, Audrey. Especially people like you who don't have any." Brandon scoffed. "Just sign. Stop dragging this out. Unless you're waiting for a miracle." Audrey took a breath. She reached into her bag. Brandon flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon or a lawsuit. Instead, she pulled out a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. "I don't want your money, Brandon," she said, "and I don't want the Honda." "Suit yourself." Brandon laughed. "More for me. Just sign the line." Audrey uncapped the pen. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She looked relieved. As the tip of the pen touched the paper, the heavy oak door at the back of the conference room creaked open. The room fell silent as the door opened. Usually in a high-stakes divorce meeting at Halloway and Associates, interruptions were forbidden. Mr. Gables, the lawyer, immediately stood up, his face flushing red. "Excuse me," Gables barked. "This is a private mediation. You cannot just walk in here." A man stepped into the room. He was older, perhaps in his early 60s, with silver hair swept back impeccably. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that didn't scream money. It whispered it. It was the kind of tailoring where no label was visible, because the tailor knew the client's name was the only brand that mattered. He walked with a cane, not out of necessity, but as an accessory of authority. He didn't say a word. He simply walked to the far end of the room, pulled out a chair in the shadows, away from the main table, and sat down. "Who is this?" Brandon demanded, spinning his chair around. "Security, Gables, call security." The old man rested his hands on the top of his cane and looked at Audrey. His eyes were a piercing, icy blue, identical to hers. "I am an observer," the man said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and carried an accent that sounded like old New York money mixed with European boarding schools. "Please, continue. Do not mind me." "An observer," Jessica scoffed, hopping off the windowsill. "What is this, a spectator sport? Get out, old man. Brandon, make him leave. He smells like mothballs." Brandon stood up, adjusting his cuffs aggressively. "Look, whoever you are, get out. I'm Brandon Cross, CEO of Nexus Stream. I rent this entire floor for my legal counsel. You are trespassing." The old man didn't blink. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a pair of spectacles, and put them on. "You rent the legal services, Mr. Cross. You do not own the building. As I understand it, the building belongs to Caldwell Holdings." Brandon paused. "So what are you, the janitor, checking the lights?" "Something like that," the man said dryly. "I was told there was a dispute regarding assets. I enjoy watching how the up-and-coming generation handles business." Mr. Gables, the lawyer, suddenly went very pale. He squinted at the man in the back. He looked at the silver hair, the specific cut of the lapel, the gold signet ring on the pinky finger. "Mr. Cross," Gables hissed under his breath. "Sit down." "What?" Brandon snapped. "Just sit down," Gables whispered, his voice trembling. Let him stay. Why? Because if we cause a scene, the building management might revoke our lease privileges. Gables lied, sweating profusely. He knew exactly who the man was. He had seen his face in the lobby portrait every morning for 15 years. But fear paralyzed him. If he told Brandon that Harrison Caldwell, the billionaire recluse of Manhattan, was watching, Brandon would act fake. And Gables had a feeling the old man wanted to see the real Brandon. Brandon rolled his eyes and sat down. Fine, whatever. If the old geezer gets his kicks watching a divorce, let him watch. It's over anyway. He turned back to Audrey. You see what I have to deal with, incompetence everywhere. Now sign. Audrey hadn't looked at the old man. She kept her eyes on the paper. Are you sure about this, Brandon? Audrey asked one last time. Once I sign this, there is no going back. I walk out of here, and I am no longer your wife. You lose all claim to me, and I lose all claim to you. Total separation. That is literally the dream, Audrey. Brandon smirked. I'm signing a deal with the Caldwell Group next week. Do you know who they are? Of course you don't. They are the biggest venture capital firm in the country. Harrison Caldwell is going to personally vet my company for $100 million injection. I need to be a bachelor. I need to be free of baggage. From the back of the room, the old man made a sound. It sounded like a cough or perhaps a suppressed laugh. Baggage, the old man repeated. Is that what a wife is? Brandon didn't turn around. A wife who brings nothing to the table. Yes, she's dead weight. I need a partner who fits my image, like Jessica. Jessica beamed, walking over to wrap her arms around Brandon's neck. Baby, tell him about the engagement party. Audrey froze. The pen hovered over the signature line. Engagement party. Brandon shrugged, not looking guilty in the least. Well, since we're signing today, I figured why wait. We booked the Plaza Hotel for this Saturday. It's going to be a double celebration, my divorce and my engagement to Jessica. It's going to be the event of the season. High society investors press. He looked at Audrey with mock pity. I'd invite you, but security will have a list. Audrey felt a coldness settle in her chest. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was clarity. You booked the Plaza, Audrey said. Grand ballroom, Jessica bragged. Top shelf everything. $10,000 for flowers alone. Interesting, Audrey murmured. She looked past Brandon, past Jessica, and her eyes met the old man's eyes in the back of the room. The old man gave her a barely perceptible nod. It was a signal. Permission granted. Audrey pressed the pen to the paper. She signed her name in a fluid, elegant script, Audrey Caldwell Cross. Then she flipped to the next page. Audrey Caldwell Cross. And the final page, oh, she capped the pen. Done, she whispered. She pushed the papers across the table to Brandon. Finally. Brandon grabbed them, checking the signatures. God, that was painful. Gables, file these immediately. I want the decree absolute by Friday. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He grabbed Jessica's hand. Come on, babe. Let's go celebrate. I need a drink. He looked at Audrey one last time. She was still sitting there, hands folded. You can keep the pen, Brandon said magnanimously. And don't forget your trash credit card. He and Jessica turned to leave. They walked past the old man in the back. Brandon paused. Hey, old-timer. Show's over. You can go back to plunging toilets or whatever you do. The old man didn't move. He just smiled, a cold, shark-like smile. The show, the old man said, has only just begun, Mr. Cross. Brandon frowned, confused for a second. but then shook his head and stormed out of the room, Jessica's heels clicking loudly behind him. The door slammed shut. The room was quiet. Mr. Gables, the lawyer, was trembling so hard his glasses slid down his nose. He stood up and bowed deeply to the man in the back. "Mr. Caldwell," Gables stammered. I had no idea." Harrison Caldwell ignored the lawyer. He stood up, leaning on his cane, and walked toward the table where Audrey sat. Audrey didn't stand up. She just looked down at her hands. Harrison reached the table. He looked at the signed divorce papers, then at the black credit card Brandon had thrown, and finally at the young woman. "He called you baggage," Harrison said softly. Audrey looked up, tears finally welling in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "Hi, Daddy." Harrison Caldwell, the billionaire owner of the building, the head of the Caldwell Group, and the man Brandon was desperate to impress next week, sighed. He reached out and placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "I told you he was a fool, Audrey," Harrison said, "but I never realized he was suicidal." Harrison picked up the credit card Brandon had thrown the severance of $10,000. He inspected it with distaste. $10,000, Harrison mused, for the heiress of the Caldwell empire. He tossed the card into the trash can in the corner. "Come, my dear, we have much to do. If he wants an engagement party at the plaza on Saturday, I think we should ensure he gets exactly what he deserves." "He thinks he booked the grand ballroom, Daddy." Audrey wiped her eye. "But doesn't Uncle Cyrus own the plaza?" "He does." Harrison smiled wicked. "And I think it's time Brandon learns that in this city you don't bite the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is holding your entire mortgage." Harrison offered his arm to his daughter. "Let's go shopping. You need a dress for an engagement party." While Brandon was hailing a yellow cab because the Uber surge pricing was ridiculous, despite just bragging about his millions, a convoy of 3 black Escalades pulled up to the curb of the skyscraper. Audrey walked out of the revolving doors, her arm linked with Harrison's. The doorman who had ignored Audrey every morning for the past 2 years when she brought Brandon his forgotten lunch nearly tripped over his own feet. He recognized the man. Everyone in New York recognized Harrison Caldwell. "Good afternoon, Mr. Caldwell," the doorman stammered, rushing to open the back door of the lead SUV. "Afternoon, Higgins." Harrison nodded, knowing the man's name because he owned the staffing agency that employed him. "Please ensure my daughter gets in safely." The doorman froze. "Your daughter, sir?" He looked at Audrey. The woman in the beige cardigan. The woman he had seen crying in the lobby just last week when her husband berated her for being 5 minutes late. Audrey smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Higgins." She slid into the leather interior, the scent of fresh orchids greeting her. Harrison climbed in beside her. The door shut, sealing out the noise of Midtown Manhattan. "Home, sir?" the driver asked. "The Hamptons estate driver," Harrison said. "We need to clear our heads, and call Cyrus. Tell him I need the Pearl Suite at the plaza prepared for Saturday, and tell him to double the security detail." As the car merged into traffic, Audrey leaned her head back against the seat. The silence was heavy. "I'm sorry I didn't tell him sooner," Audrey whispered. I wanted to know he loved me. Not the money, not the connections. Just Audrey." "And you found out," Harrison said gently. "It was an expensive lesson, my dear, but a necessary one. You spent 2 years playing the role of a supportive wife to a narcissist. You cooked, you cleaned, you balanced his books in secret. You even used your trust fund dividends to pay off his initial business loan anonymously." Audrey nodded. He thinks an angel investor saved him from bankruptcy. I am the angel investor, Harrison grunted. Or rather, you are. And next week, when he sits down to negotiate with the Caldwell Group for his IPO funding, he's going to realize that the angel has come to collect the debt. Meanwhile, across town, Brandon Cross was popping a bottle of Dom Perignon in his new office. The office was mostly glass and chrome, designed to intimidate visitors. Jessica was spinning in his chair, holding a glass of champagne. I can't believe she actually signed, Jessica laughed. I thought she'd fight for the apartment at least. She has no spine, Brandon sneered, kicking his feet up on the desk. That's her problem. She's small. Small-minded, small dreams. She was holding me back, Jess. Look at me now. Single stock price soaring, and in 3 days I'm announcing our engagement at the plaza. It's the power move of the century. His phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. This is Brandon Cross, he answered smoothly. Mr. Cross. A crisp, professional female voice spoke. This is Eleanor, strict executive assistant to Harrison Caldwell. Brandon sat up straight, nearly spilling his champagne. He frantically motioned for Jessica to be quiet. Yes, Ms. Strict. An honor to hear from you. Mr. Caldwell has reviewed your preliminary proposal for Nexus Stream, the woman said. He is intrigued. He would like to attend your event on Saturday at the plaza. He believes it would be the perfect environment to assess your character before signing the funding checks next week. Brandon's heart hammered against his ribs. Harrison Caldwell was coming to his party. This was it. This was the golden ticket. If Caldwell backed him, Brandon would be on the cover of Forbes. That would be incredible. Brandon choked out. Please tell Mr. Caldwell he is the guest of honor. He will be there, the woman said. He will be bringing a companion, a silent partner in the Caldwell Group, who has final veto power on all investments. Impress them, Mr. Cross. They do not suffer fools lightly. The line went dead. Brandon let out a whoop of victory that echoed down the hallway. We did it. Jess Caldwell is coming. We are going to be billionaires. He grabbed Jessica and spun her around. I need a new suit. I need the best tailor in the city. And you go buy a dress that says trophy wife. We have to look perfect. Nothing can go wrong. Back in the Hamptons inside a sprawling oceanfront mansion that cost more than the GDP of a small country, Audrey was standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror. The beige cardigan was in the trash. She was wearing a silk robe. Behind her, a team of 3 stylists, flown in from Paris and Milan, were organizing racks of couture gowns. No, Audrey said, rejecting a pink chiffon number. Too soft. That was the old Audrey. She walked down the line of dresses. Her fingers grazed silks, velvets, and satins. She stopped at a gown that was the color of the midnight sky, a deep, shimmering obsidian blue with diamond accents woven into the bodice. It was structured sharp and commanded attention. This one, she said. A bold choice, Miss Caldwell, the stylist said. This is from the Vange collection. It is meant for a woman who is hunting. Audrey smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had worn in months. It was cold, and it was dangerous. Exactly, she said. I'm not going there to celebrate an engagement. I'm going there to attend a funeral. A funeral, Miss... Yes. Audrey turned to the mirror, her blue eyes flashing. The funeral of Brandon Cross's career. Saturday night arrived with a humid electric tension in the air. The Plaza Hotel, an icon of New York luxury at the corner of Central Park South, was glowing. Limousines lined up 3 deep at the entrance. The paparazzi were out in full force, tipped off by Brandon's PR team that a major tech announcement was happening. Inside the grand ballroom, the scene was one of excessive opulence. Brandon had spared no expense, mostly because he had put it all on company credit, assuming the Caldwell investment would cover it later. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the gold-leafed ceiling. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets moved like ghosts through the crowd, offering flutes of vintage champagne and trays of caviar. Brandon stood at the top of the grand staircase, gripping the banister. He was sweating. "Stop fidgeting," Jessica hissed. She was wearing a red dress that was tight enough to cut off circulation covered in sequins. It was flashy, expensive, and lacked all subtlety. "You look like you're guilty of something." "I'm nervous, Jess," Brandon muttered, scanning the crowd below. "Caldwell isn't here yet. It's 8:00 p.m. The invitation said 7:30. Billionaires are always late," Jessica dismissed. "Look, there's the VP of Goldman Sachs. Go say hi." The room was filled with the sharks of Wall Street. Men in $5,000 suits and women dripping in diamonds. But there was a strange energy in the room. Whispers. Mr. Gables, the lawyer who had overseen the divorce 3 days ago, was standing near the bar drinking scotch as if it were water. He looked pale. Every time the ballroom doors opened, he flinched. "Gables," Brandon shouted, descending the stairs. "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost? Cheer up, tonight is the night." Gables looked at Brandon with a mixture of pity and terror. "Mr. Cross, have you checked the guest list properly?" "Of course," Brandon scoffed. "Why?" "No reason," Gables mumbled, turning back to his drink. "Just good luck." At that moment, the music, a live string quartet playing Mozart, stopped abruptly. The heavy double doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open. A hush fell over the room. It wasn't the polite silence of arrival. It was the awed silence of power entering a vacuum. Harrison Caldwell stood in the doorway. He looked like a king returning to his court. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He held his cane, his silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. The room gasped. Harrison Caldwell never went to parties. He was a myth, a recluse. His presence here validated Brandon Cross instantly. Brandon's face lit up. He smoothed his jacket and began to rush forward. "Mr. Caldwell, you made it." But Harrison didn't move. He stood there, waiting. He turned slightly and extended his hand back toward the hallway. "And," the announcer at the door boomed, his voice trembling slightly, "Ms. Audrey Caldwell." The name hung in the air for a second. Caldwell Brandon froze mid-step. He blinked. Audrey. No, it couldn't be. His Audrey was a nobody. Her last name was... Well, he actually couldn't remember her maiden name because he never cared to ask about her family. Then she stepped into the light. It was Audrey. But it wasn't the Audrey who wore beige cardigans and apologized for existing. This woman was a statue of vengeance carved from ice and diamonds. The midnight blue dress hugged her curves, the slit running up the leg revealing heels that looked sharp enough to kill. Her hair, usually tied in a messy bun, was cascaded in polished waves over her shoulders. Around her neck sat a sapphire necklace that was famously owned by the Russian Romanov family, a piece of jewelry worth more than Brandon's entire company. She took her father's arm. She lifted her chin. Her eyes swept the room, dismissing the hundreds of guests until they locked onto Brandon. She didn't smile. She just stared. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, dropping her clutch. "Is that the wife?" Brandon felt the blood drain from his face. His knees buckled slightly. No, that's impossible. She's broke. I gave her $10,000. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Harrison and Audrey walked into the room. The silence was deafening. Every eye was on them. Brandon, operating on pure adrenaline and denial, forced a smile onto his face and stepped into their path. Mr. Caldwell. Brandon's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. Welcome. And, Audrey, what are you doing here? Did you get a job catering? It was a stupid thing to say, a desperate thing to say. The crowd murmured. Someone laughed nervously. Harrison Caldwell looked at Brandon with a look of pure disgust. Mr. Cross, you seem confused. Well, yes, Brandon stammered. This is my ex-wife. I'm not sure how she got past security, but she didn't need to get past security. Harrison interrupted, his voice booming across the silent ballroom. She owns the security company. In fact, she owns this hotel. The glass in Brandon's hand slipped. It shattered on the marble floor. Crash. What? Brandon whispered. Allow me to introduce you properly, Harrison said, placing a hand on Audrey's back. You know her as Audrey, the woman you divorced 3 days ago, because she was boring and brought nothing to the table. But the world knows her as Audrey Caldwell, my only daughter, the sole heir to the Caldwell fortune, and the majority shareholder of the venture capital firm you are begging for money. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, and shocked exclamations rippled through the hundreds of guests. Phones were raised, recording the moment. Jessica took a step back, distancing herself from Brandon. Audrey took a step forward. The smell of her perfume, something expensive and rare, hit Brandon. Hello, Brandon, she said. Her voice was smooth, confident, unrecognizable from the soft murmur he was used to. You wanted a partner who fit your image. Remember, someone with connections, someone with money. She gestured to the opulent ballroom, the confused investors, the terrified lawyer. Well, here I am, she said, but I'm afraid my appearance fee is a little higher than $10,000. Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Audrey, wait. Baby, I didn't know. You never told me. You never asked, she replied coldly. You were too busy talking about yourself. But the prenup. Brandon grasped at straws. We signed a prenup. You get nothing. Mr. Gables, the lawyer, stepped forward from the crowd, looking like he wanted to die. Actually, Mr. Cross. Shut up, Gables, Brandon snapped. No, let him speak, Audrey said. Gables wiped sweat from his forehead. Mr. Cross, the prenup, stated that both parties leave with what they brought into the marriage. Since Miss Caldwell brought in, well, billions in assets held in offshore trusts, and you brought in debt, the separation of assets is quite clear. Furthermore, Harrison interjected, enjoying the moment, since you used Nexus Stream Company funds to lease the Honda she was driving, and since you admitted in a recorded legal proceeding that you were giving it to her, that constitutes a transfer of company assets. And since you just admitted to fraud by hosting a private party on company dime. Harrison leaned in close to Brandon. I don't think we will be investing in Nexus Stream, Mr. Cross. In fact, I think my daughter, who sits on the board of the bank that holds your business loans, might be calling in your debts. Tonight. Brandon looked at Audrey. He looked at the woman he had discarded like trash. Audrey, he pleaded, his voice trembling. Please, it was a mistake. Jessica meant nothing. I was stressed. We can fix this. We can renew our vows right now. Look, everyone is here. Audrey looked at him. For a second, Brandon thought he saw pity. Then she laughed. It was a light, airy sound. Renew our vows? She asked. Brandon, I didn't come here to marry you. I came here to ruin you. She turned to the band. Play something festive, she commanded. I feel like dancing. As the music swelled, Brandon stood amidst the shattered glass of his champagne flute, watching the love of his life and the fortune he had chased for years spin away into the arms of a handsome European count who had just cut in. The trap had snapped shut, and Brandon was the rat caught in the middle. The music in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel continued a lively Viennese waltz that clashed violently with the devastation unfolding in the center of the room. For Brandon Cross, the world had turned into a kaleidoscope of nightmare scenarios. 10 minutes ago, he was the king of New York. Now he was the court jester. He stood frozen as the crowd physically recoiled from him. In high society, failure is contagious, and humiliation is a terminal disease. No one wanted to be seen standing next to the man who had just divorced the Caldwell heiress for a secretary. Brandon, a voice hissed at his elbow. It was Jessica. He turned to her, desperate for an ally. Jess, listen, we need to spin this. We can say, I knew all along. We can say it was a strategic separation for tax purposes. Jessica looked at him as if he were a cockroach on the hem of her expensive dress. She wasn't looking at his face. She was looking past him at the handsome European count spinning Audrey around the dance floor. She was looking at the diamonds on Audrey's neck. You idiot! Jessica spat. You absolute moron. What, babe, we're in this together, Brandon pleaded, reaching for her arm. She snatched her arm away. Don't touch me. You told me she was a waitress. You told me she was a nobody. You made me look like a fool in front of Harrison Caldwell. I didn't know. That's worse, Jessica shrieked, her voice rising above the music. You lived with her for 2 years and didn't know she was worth billions. You're not a CEO, Brandon. You're a blind, incompetent loser. She pulled the engagement ring off her finger, a 3-carat diamond Brandon had bought on credit just yesterday, and threw it at his chest. I'm done. Don't call me. I need to go find someone who can actually pay for my Uber. Jessica stormed off, pushing her way through the crowd toward the bar, where she immediately began chatting up a vice president from J.P. Morgan. Brandon stood alone. The ring bounced off his chest and rolled under a table. He didn't even chase it. Suddenly, he was surrounded, not by well-wishers, but by the wolves he had invited. Cross. It was Simon Trent, one of his angel investors. Is it true? Does Caldwell hold the debt on the Series B round? Simon, let me explain. I don't want explanations. Trent barked. I want my capital out. If Harrison Caldwell is hostile toward you, this company is dead in the water. I'm triggering the clawback clause. Tonight. You can't do that, Brandon gasped. That will bankrupt the operating account. Watch me, Trent sneered. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling legal. Another man stepped up. It was the reporter from the Wall Street Journal, whom Brandon had begged to come. Mr. Cross, the reporter said, holding up a voice recorder. Can you comment on the rumors that you used corporate funds to pay for your mistress's apartment? Miss Caldwell just mentioned a forensic audit. No comment. Get that away from me. Brandon swatted at the recorder. Assaulting the press. The reporter smirked. That's going to look great in the Sunday edition. CEO melts down at ex-wife's victory party. Up on the balcony overlooking the ballroom, Harrison Caldwell and Audrey stood watching the chaos below. A waiter brought them fresh champagne. "It's barbaric," Harrison noted, taking a sip, watching them tear him apart. "He wanted the spotlight," Audrey said, her voice devoid of pity. "He wanted everyone to look at him. I just gave him what he asked for." She looked down at Brandon. He was sweating, shouting at an investor, his tie crooked, his face purple with rage. He looked small. "Did you love him?" Harrison asked quietly. Audrey hesitated. She watched Brandon shove a waiter who tried to offer him water. "I loved who I thought he was," she said. "I loved the man who ate grilled cheese sandwiches with me at 2 a.m. and talked about changing the world with technology. But that man never existed. He was just an actor waiting for a bigger stage." "Well," Harrison turned away from the railing, "the curtain has fallen. Let's go, my dear. I believe the board of directors at the bank has an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. tomorrow to discuss the foreclosure of Nexus Stream." "Foreclosure?" Audrey raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yes." Harrison smiled darkly. "He missed a payment 3 months ago. We let it slide because, well, he was family. We are no longer sliding." 3 weeks later. New York City was unforgiving in November. The wind whipped through the canyons of steel and glass, carrying a biting rain that soaked through cheap fabric instantly. Brandon Cross stood outside the towering glass headquarters of the Caldwell Group. He wasn't wearing his Italian wool suit that had been sold to a consignment shop. He was wearing a generic raincoat he'd bought at a drugstore. He looked 10 years older. His face was gaunt, unshaven, and his eyes were hollow. The fall had been swift and total. The morning after the Plaza fiasco, the SEC had launched an investigation into his use of company funds. The board of Nexus Stream fired him before noon. By 2 p.m., the bank called in his personal loans. His penthouse was seized. His car was repossessed. Even his credit cards were frozen. He was currently sleeping on his friend Mark's couch in Jersey City, but Mark had told him this morning that he had to leave by the weekend because it was bringing down the vibe. Brandon checked his watch. It was a cheap plastic digital one. 12:30 p.m. He knew she would come out now. She always took lunch at 12:30. He remembered that much at least. The revolving doors spun. Brandon's heart leapt. A group of executives walked out laughing, and there in the center was Audrey. She looked radiant. She wore a cream-colored power suit, her hair blow-dried to perfection. She was holding a tablet and talking to a man who looked like a senator. Brandon lunged forward. "Audrey!" The security guards at the entrance stepped forward instantly, their hands going to their belts. They saw a disheveled man shouting at the heiress. "Ma'am, step back," one guard barked. Audrey stopped. She looked up and saw him. She waved her hand at the guards. "It's okay, Frank. I know him." The guards hesitated, but stepped aside, forming a wall between Audrey and the street, leaving a 5-foot buffer. Brandon walked up to the line water dripping from his nose. "Audrey," he panted. I've been trying to call you. Your number changed." "It did," she said pleasantly. "How are you, Brandon?" "How am I?" Brandon laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. "I'm ruined, Audrey. They took everything, the company, the apartment. I have $40 to my name." $40? "I remember having $40, Audrey said calmly. "When I was 19, living in a dorm, refusing to touch my father's money so I could learn what the real world felt like. It's character building, isn't it?" "Stop it," Brandon yelled, then lowered his voice as people on the street stared. "Look, I get it. You wanted to teach me a lesson. Lesson learned. Okay, I'm humbled. I'm sorry. I was an arrogant prick. But this is too much. You can't just destroy a man's life because of a bad breakup. I didn't destroy your life, Brandon, Audrey said. I just stopped subsidizing it. Subsidizing? Who do you think convinced the landlord to give you 3 extra months on the office rent when you started? Audrey asked. Me. I paid him cash from my grandmother's trust. Who do you think fixed your pitch deck before the Series A round me? I rewrote the entire financial model while you were sleeping. Brandon blinked. You did the model? Yes. And who do you think put a good word in with the tech crunch editors to get you that first article? Audrey stepped closer, her eyes hard. I was never just a waitress, Brandon. I was your partner. I was the engine, keeping your rusty little car running. You just never bothered to look under the hood. Brandon slumped. The rain was cold, but the truth was colder. He realized with a sickening jolt that she was right. Every time he had a stroke of luck in the last 2 years, Audrey had been there in the background, smiling, handing him coffee, saying, "It will work out." He had mistaken her competence for invisibility. "I need help, Audrey." Brandon whispered, his pride finally shattering completely. "I have nowhere to go. No one will hire me. My name is poison in this city. Please, just a loan or a job. I'll sweep the floors. Anything." Audrey looked at him. She looked at the man who had thrown a credit card at her and told her to move to Queens. She opened her purse. Brandon held his breath. Was she going to give him a check? A key to an apartment? She pulled out a business card. It was plain white with a phone number on it. "This is the number for a recruitment agency in Ohio," she said, handing it to him. "They specialize in entry-level sales positions. It's honest work. You get a base salary and commission. Rent is cheap in Ohio." Brandon stared at the card. Ohio entry-level sales. "It's a fresh start, Brandon," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "New York isn't for you. You got lost here. Maybe somewhere else where no one knows you. You can learn to be a person again, instead of a CEO." She turned to go. "Audrey," he called out one last time. She stopped but didn't turn around. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. "Or was I just a project?" Audrey looked at her reflection in the glass door of the building she would one day inherit. "I loved you enough to hide who I was, so you could feel big," she said. "But I love myself enough to stop shrinking." She walked through the revolving doors and vanished into the warmth of the lobby. Brandon stood alone in the rain. He looked down at the business card. Midwest Auto Sales and Solutions. He looked up at the skyscraper disappearing into the mist. He realized then that the distance between him and Audrey wasn't just glass and security guards. It was a universe. He put the card in his pocket, turned his collar up against the wind, and began the long walk to the bus station. 2 years had passed since the rain-soaked afternoon outside the Caldwell Tower. New York City had moved on, as it always does. The scandal of Nexus Stream's bankruptcy was now just a footnote in financial tabloids, a cautionary tale taught in business schools about the dangers of over-leveraging and underestimating your spouse. In the penthouse office of the Caldwell Group, Audrey sat behind the massive oak desk that had once belonged to her father. Harrison Caldwell had officially retired to a vineyard in Tuscany 6 months ago, leaving the empire in Audrey's hands. She wasn't the same woman who had sat in that dreary conference room wearing a beige cardigan. She was sharper, stronger. Her hair was cut into a chic bob, and she wore a tailored emerald suit that commanded respect. She was reviewing the quarterly philanthropic grants when her assistant, a young man named Leo, knocked on the door. "Ms. Caldwell," Leo said. "The mail came in. Most of it is standard, but there's a personal envelope. It has no return address, but it's postmarked from Columbus, Ohio." Audrey froze. Her pen hovered over the paper. "Ohio. Leave it, Leo." "Thank you." When the door clicked shut, Audrey stared at the envelope. It was cheap white paper. The handwriting was familiar, not the jagged, rushed scrawl of an arrogant CEO, but a neater, more deliberate script. She picked up her silver letter opener and sliced the envelope. Inside there was no letter, no long apology, no excuses. There was only a cashier's check. "Pay to the order of Audrey Caldwell. Amount $10,000. Audrey stared at the number. $10,000. It was the exact amount Brandon had thrown at her on the mahogany table during their divorce. The severance pay. She turned the check over. On the back, in small blue ink, was a short note for the Honda. And the lesson. B. Audrey let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes, and for a moment the skyscrapers of New York faded away, replaced by the image of a snowy car lot in the Midwest. 500 miles away in the gray outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, the wind was howling. Brandon Cross blew warm air into his cupped hands and stomped the snow off his boots. He was wearing a thick parka with the logo Midwest Auto Sales embroidered on the chest. "Hey, Cross," his manager, a gruff man named Big Tony, yelled from the office. "You got a customer on the lot, looking at the used sedans." "On it, Tony," Brandon called back. He jogged out into the cold. He didn't walk with the swagger he used to have. His stride was purposeful, humble. He approached a young couple shivering by a row of cars. They looked terrified, clearly buying their first car together, likely worried about credit checks and down payments. "Afternoon, folks," Brandon said with a genuine smile, a smile that actually reached his eyes now. "Cold one today. You looking for something reliable that won't break the bank?" "Yeah," the young man said nervously. We don't have much. We just need to get to work." "I get it." Brandon nodded. "I know what it's like to start over. Let me show you this Civic over here. It's got low mileage and I can work with the financing guy to get you a rate that makes sense. We're not here to rob you." As he walked them towards the car, a flashy red convertible pulled into the dealership lot. It was out of place in the grey winter, loud, obnoxious, and expensive. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was wearing a fur coat that looked cheap and fake, and heels that were sinking into the slush. It was Jessica. Brandon stopped in his tracks. He hadn't seen her in 2 years, not since she threw the ring at his chest at the plaza. She looked older, harder. Her makeup was too heavy trying to cover the lines of stress. She spotted him and smirked, walking over. "Well, well," she laughed, looking at his parka. "Look at you, the great Brandon Cross, selling used cars in flyover country." Brandon excused himself from the young couple. "Give me one moment, folks," and walked over to her. He didn't feel the old anger. He just felt pity. "Hello, Jessica. What are you doing in Ohio?" "Visiting family," she lied smoothly. "Thought I'd look you up. Heard you were here." She looked him up and down, licking her lips. "You know, Brandon, New York is boring, and I broke up with that banker. He was cheap. Maybe we could grab a drink?" "For old time's sake, I bet you're lonely out here." She stepped close, her hand reaching for his zipper. "We were good together, Brandon. We were a power couple. Maybe we can figure a way out of here. Together." Brandon looked at her hand. He remembered how easily she had turned on him when the money vanished. He remembered the humiliation. He gently took her hand and removed it from his coat. "I'm not lonely, Jessica," Brandon said softly. He turned and pointed toward the dealership's glass window. Inside, sitting at the reception desk, was a woman. She wasn't a model. She wasn't rich. She was the receptionist, Sarah. She had brown hair, a kind smile, and she was currently knitting a scarf. She looked up, saw Brandon, and waved happily. Brandon waved back. "I have everything I need right here," Brandon said to Jessica. "And I have customers waiting. People who need help, not a performance." "You're pathetic," Jessica sneered, her ego bruised. "You're a nobody." "Maybe." Brandon shrugged. "But at least I sleep at night." He turned his back on her and walked back to the young couple by the Civic. "Sorry about that," Brandon told them. "Just a ghost. Now let me show you the trunk space on this beauty." As he explained the warranty, he felt a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He had sent the check that morning. It had taken him 2 years of saving every commission, eating ramen, and living in a studio apartment to scrape together $10,000. He was broke again, but his debt was paid. Back in New York, Audrey picked up the phone. "Finance department," she said. "Yes, Ms. Caldwell. I'm sending down a check for $10,000. Deposit it into the Second Chance Scholarship Fund." "Of course. Should we list the donor name?" Audrey looked at the check one last time before dropping it into the outbox. She thought about the man she had married, the man who wanted to conquer the world, and the man who had finally learned that the world wasn't something you conquered, it was something you earned. "List the donor as anonymous," Audrey said. She stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The sun was setting over Central Park, casting a golden glow over the city. She wasn't angry anymore. The karma had come full circle. He had lost the millions he didn't deserve, but perhaps in the snow of Ohio he had found the soul he had lost. Audrey smiled, touched the cool glass, and whispered to the city below. "We're even, Brandon. We're finally even." She turned off the lights in her office and walked out the door, ready to meet her father for dinner. She walked with her head high, not because of her billions, but because she knew exactly who she was. And this time, no one would ever underestimate her again. And that is the story of how a $10,000 severance check cost a man an empire, but maybe, just maybe, bought him back his humanity. It's a brutal reminder that in life you never truly know who is watching from the back of the room. Brandon thought he was signing divorce papers with a powerless woman, but he was really signing his own resignation from the high life. What do you think? Did Audrey go too far with her revenge at the plaza, or did Brandon get exactly what he deserved? And do you think Brandon's repayment of the $10,000 earns him forgiveness? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of karma, betrayal, and redemption, please smash that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good drama, and subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you never miss a new story. Thanks for listening.